to look at your big eyes. You can say, good morning. It's a lovely response. Welcome to We Read For You today. It is the 1st of November, so very close to the end of the year as well. So nice turn up for the end of the year. Just before I introduce Stan today, I just want to just very briefly talk about We Read For You. I think everybody knows we do this once a month. And because there are so many business books on the shelves and people don't have time to read themselves, and we do this where we get somebody to read the book, come here and present the book to you in an hour. So please look on our website. There are, we're looking at saying what are the right books that people should be reading. So for next year, please look on the website. There will be, every month there will be a book. But to come to today, so today is a little bit different than normal. We haven't asked somebody to read the book and come present it to you. What we've done today is we have the author of the book here. So I'm going to introduce Stan. I've known Stan for a very long time. I'm not going to tell you how long because it will give away both of our ages. Stan's passion lies in systems thinking and business strategy. He's the co-founder and executive director of Lateral Dimensions, which is a strategic consulting company. He feels that his role is to empower business by enhancing their sustainable competitiveness. And I think in the world today that's very important for us. Stan is also a faculty member of the University of Stellenbosch Business School Executive Development. He has facilitated for the Business School of the Netherlands, the Da Vinci Institute, and the University of Stellenbosch Institute for Futures Research. His interests are in managing complexity in the 21st century, and we all know about that, which led to the topic for his PhD in business environmental scanning and complexity. This has further resulted in groundbreaking thought processes that impact directly on strategic thinking, and which are proving to be pivotal in companies retaining their competitiveness. His book, as Stan says, it will 21st centurize your current strategic thinking and put you in the forefront of confronting and managing today's business challenges. It will assist you to excel in more thoughtful and innovative strategies amidst operating in an imprecise business environment. So we thank Stan for being here today. And to come and share some of the insights, we're looking forward to some of that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. Linda, thank you very much for that warm welcome. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for you all for attending. I just want to, I normally don't make an exception because I know it's difficult for everybody to be here and we all have busy schedules. But I have my father here this morning. That surprised me. With today's visit. So, Paul, baie welkom. Baie lekker om hier te All right, we are expecting one or two other people still, but we've decided to start. I want to start this morning's presentation just by sharing a bit of a story with you. About 5 years ago, I very much got stuck on a contract in Sudan, in northern Sudan. I worked in the capital city of northern Sudan by the name of Khartoum. Used to be the capital city of the old Khartoum, and of the old northern Sudan before the country was split into two. Now, as a country under sanction and in a, one can say, a state of a kind of a civil war, there for the first time I experienced very close to me, almost under my skin, the challenges that a business faces when I was the acting CEO for a multinational organization. So the challenges that a business faces when it has to manage and it has to remain sustainable and it has to remain competitive when having to operate in an environment that in a way has become completely dysfunctional and random, both in terms of the intensity of change and also in terms of the pace of change. Now, when I tell this story to people, many people say to me, but surely that's an extreme example. In actual fact, if we look at the world today, and specifically the business environment, it's not. We all know that the business environment has become extremely disrupted, random, volatile, unpredictable. It has grown what I call a character of malice, best illustrated through this photo. The environment, like that soldier in the middle, really couldn't care about you as a business anymore. It changes all the time. And it does it without thinking or without considering the fact that it's difficult to keep up with the pace of that change. Now, this has led many organizations to find themselves at a tipping point, a crisis with regards to many aspects. Skills shortages on the one side, unemployment on the other side, almost having their own tug of war on a seemingly counterindicative scale. Greece, Spain, Portugal not getting out of the economic doldrums. China slowing down, then according to other economists not slowing down, and then slowing down again. Labor in the mining industry and the agricultural industry seemingly not finding solutions, not finding cohesion with business, and vice versa. In 2011 alone, we lost over R1 billion in wages due to work stoppages, money that should have gone back into the economy. In the same period, we lost 208 working days in that year for every 1,000 employees in the country. And so the list carries on. Looking at this status of the business environment, it has led me to believe that as organizations and as governmental institutions, we need to change our strategic behavior. We need to change our strategic dialogues. And for that, we fundamentally require a change in our strategic thinking. And that is what strategic thinking Game Over is all about. I really want to thank you again in advance for attending this morning as I take you through the outcome of a research project that took me 7 years in completion of my degree, mentioned by Belinda. My father, thank you for being here this morning, played an instrumental part in assisting in the completion of that. And we state these findings in the book. That's really it sits at the back. It substantiates the findings that we elucidate in this book. I did it along with the Business School of Stellenbosch and under the promotion of Professor Toby de Koning. Now, I'll start this morning by giving you some background on the book, elaborating what we researched, what we came up with, the findings, what it yielded, what it means for businesses today, what the significance of that is, and how it helps organizations that are willing to embrace a new way of thinking, that's willing to think differently about things. In the process, we'll very much focus on complexity as a characteristic of the environment, and also focus on dynamism as another characteristic of the environment, and then very specifically look at how those two characteristics impact on both current ways of strategic thinking and also future ways of possible strategic thinking. So, let us start. Strategic thinking, the book, very much comes alive in the context of the Chinese wish, may you live in interesting times. As this wish, I think, to a large extent, illustrates or explains, describes the challenges that we have in the postmodern era regarding strategic thinking. As my promoter, Professor de Koning, would say by now, most of us have become used to the fact that we are challenged in terms of our strategic thinking, in terms of what we need to do from a strategic point. But the biggest challenge is that amidst this complexity that we are experiencing, we find that mechanistic and non-systemic approaches is failing in terms of addressing these strategic challenges. Now, de Koning wasn't all that new in saying it. For many years, Peter Drucker reminded organizations that our biggest challenge would be to simplify, reduce the complexity of the environment into manageable bits, into manageable simplicity. So, in a way, the description as given by de Koning and Drucker and possibly others shaped the background of what I try to address in the book. I'm of the opinion that they describe the challenge very accurately, but I go further to ask the question, what would be the correct manner within which to deal with this challenge, this strategic challenge that our current ways of thinking is seemingly not enough, not appropriate, not adequate. In doing so, I believe that we don't necessarily just need something new, but we need something distinctly different, which lies at the core of the way in which we're thinking about our business environment. Professor de Koning again talks about the floating equilibrium, and I'll talk more about that. But the reason why I believe we need something distinctly different is the complexity that I talk about is not based on the sum of smaller bits, but rather refers to the interrelatedness and interdependency between systems, that linkages between systems, politics, customers, labor, public pressure groups, and others, that complexity between them. And to simply apply a mechanistic approach in terms of solving that proves to be difficult, because it's in this environment that we have to find the best strategic cause for our organizations. And that's where Professor de Quinen talks about the so-called floating equilibrium, meaning that we need to move along with and change along with the environment. In the process, of course, we have to unlearn. I had this question the other day when I did a talk on the book, and somebody asked me, how do you unlearn? I don't know, so don't ask me the question again. But it's a difficult thing to do. We almost have to start over, unlearn what we know, forget about what we know, and learn new, more appropriate levels of strategic thinking. Okay, so having given you a bit of background on the origin of the book, what sort of led to the motivation for writing the book and doing the research, let's now look more particularly at what it is that we researched in terms of the book and what we came up with. The book first and foremost looked at strategic conceptual scanning frameworks. These would be pictures that organizations use when they scan the environment, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with those. Now, over and above these frameworks that businesses use to conceptualize the environment and get an idea what the environment looks like, we also looked at scanning processes, scanning approaches, scanning methodologies. Now, we chose to start with scanning because scanning appears to be that activity that most organizations perform with the primary aim of gathering information, both of the external environment and also of the internal environment, for purposes of feeding, or as Elizabeth Dostler would say, informing my strategic selection. And that's why we chose to start with scanning. Of course, one can also ask, what's the importance of scanning? Scanning's importance is very much embedded in its correlation with business performance. It was interesting for me when I did the research, at the time of doing the research, I discovered that ever since the very first research was done on the correlation between business performance and scanning, a positive correlation has always been elucidated, yielding a graph looking something like this. It's a simplified version, but it basically indicates that the more I scan, the higher the likelihood or probability that I will have an increased business performance. The challenge, however, is that it's not as simple as merely scanning, because business performance is viewed and treated almost taking a seat right at the end of a number of sequential other business activities. Now, what are those activities? Well, as mentioned, we need to start by scanning. It gives you a sort of a basket of information. We talk about a compound of information. From that, I extract bits and pieces of the information and I craft scenarios, possible future options of what may or might not happen. Then only I can make a strategic selection. Companies talk about an appropriate strategy or a environmental organizational fit. Now you'll see, as illustrated here, that business performance is thus viewed and treated as an outcome at the end of these preceding activities, which all follows in sequence with one another. But what is important is, yes, there is a positive correlation between scanning and business performance, but scanning is the starting point of the entire strategic thinking process. Which brings us to a very important point in terms of the research and also what we elaborate on in the book, is that if scanning is the starting point of our strategic thinking process, that framework that I just showed you, that conceptualization of what the environment looks like, that needs to be as real, as wide, as deep, as complete, as thorough, as appropriate as possible. Otherwise, if our conceptualization of the environment is incorrect, flawed in a way, inappropriate, not complete, we might find that the positive correlation that I elucidated or referred to earlier on might start to do this, whereby the positive correlation regresses into a negative one. And we're already seeing evidence of this, which is also a motivation that prompted the research behind the book. Now, the advantage of the book, or the benefit of the book, really is that amidst the complexity of the 21st century, it provides us with a scanning approach, a methodology, a process, and very importantly, an expanded new scanning framework, which, if applied appropriately, should lead to better decision making in terms of strategy. Now, in giving us these approaches and tools and techniques in the book addresses two types of thinking. The one is what they call reductionist, which, as you can hear by the word, is really to reduce things, to break it down into smaller manageable bits. The other one would be to manage through synthesis. Now, reductionists, most of us are very familiar with. That's when you break the environment. So you would take something like PESTEL, you break it into politics, economy, social, legal, environment, and all the other various systems in it. Government, labor, public vision. It's a reductionist approach. You break it by means of segmenting it and categorizing it. The other one is synthesis, where you manage the environment by looking at that interrelatedness and interdependency that I referred to earlier on. Now that gives us a better understanding of the environment. So we enhance our management of the environment and our organizations within the environment with higher levels of understanding, not necessarily knowing more about the environment. Now, for us to get to those findings in terms of the research, we had to determine first and foremost how businesses currently are performing environmental scanning, and yes, it would appear that most of them are using tried and tested methodologies. Porter's five forces, dividing the environment into a competitive environment, having buyers, suppliers, new entrants, possible substitute products, etc., and or PESTEL, and I already spoke about PESTEL. What is important though is in the process, organizations also make use of frameworks, and this is where we started, conceptualizations of the environment. This is a generic picture. If you Google scanning frameworks, you get more than 1,000 of these. Now what we did in terms of the study is we focused on two fundamental, what we call flaws in these kind of conceptualizations. The one is that it is one-dimensional. This only reflects what you are scanning. The academics refer to it as the ontological reality, the reality out there. So it's one-dimensional. The other thing is it's based, as you can see, on the mechanistic approach, reductions, breaking it down, fostering the idea with organizations that the environment really looks like this, that I can segment it, that I can look at it in terms of silos, that I can take PESTEL and have these tabular formats just highlighting key features in that environment. Those are the two things we looked at. And what we try to include in a structured manner in these type of conceptualizations is how we are viewing the environment. For us in the 21st century, it's become very important to consider worldview, how you view things, your own individual dimension or individual perspective. Let me illustrate by referencing to a glass half filled with water. The glass half filled with water refers to the reality, the business environment out there. Conceptualized, painted, scanned, a picture, a framework. How you and I view that glass half filled with water, however, will determine whether I see it half full and you might see it half empty. So you and I can be looking at exactly the same reality out there, but see two total opposites of that reality. Now there's nothing wrong or right in that. It's just we need to, in a structured manner, include that individual perception, that dimension in conceptual scanning frameworks as well. Now the question is how we do that. That of course is by no means an easy task. And the reason for that is, as organizations, we see what we are taught to see. As people, you see what you are taught to see. If I right now use the word cow, most of you will probably see a four-legged animal standing somewhere in a field grazing. But if you think about it, you also find a cow in the sea. A whale is also a cow, but we don't think of that as a cow. Probably because since you were this old, you got a little toy to play with, and that was a cow, the four-legged one standing somewhere in the field grazing. So what we see, up to a large extent, is a manifestation of what we were taught to see. And in here lies a dichotomy. We cannot unsee or unthink things. I got this little exercise from Colleen Bloom that also does work in neuro-leadership, and I want to use that to illustrate this point. Everybody sees the pink sheep. Now right there where you're sitting, I want you to very quickly close your eyes. Close your eyes, everybody close your eyes. And I want you to now, in your mind, unsee the pink sheep. And by the smiles I gather, that's not possible. Now open your eyes. We can't unsee things. What we can do, however, is we can expand those conceptualizations or replace them with new ones. Now you see the blue cow. If you close your eyes again, you'll see that as you move from the pink sheep to the blue cow, in the process you're not seeing the pink sheep anymore. And that's what we mean when we say we expand or change our current conceptualizations of the environment. Taking that into strategic thinking, let me ask you this, and this was the critical question that we asked throughout the research period. what if our current conceptualization of the business environment is incorrect, flawed, incomplete? What if the environment is actually a pink sheep, but we see a blue cow? I mean, wouldn't you agree that based on that probability, that likelihood, that it's worthwhile to consider maybe expanding or changing our current conceptualizations, even if just in an approach, an attempt to start addressing the challenge that I presented right in the beginning of this talk this morning, which is that our current ways of strategic thinking might be incomplete, is seemingly not enough. We're not managing to solve the challenges that we have as businesses in the 21st century. At the end of the day, we're still working with conceptualization. The Romans called it animo fingere, which is Latin, and if you translate it directly, it means to be created in the mind. And that's the challenge. I chose it as the title of the final chapter in my book. Now, most organizations have been using frameworks like this, fostering the idea that the environment looks like. Well, we all know today that this is actually a representation of a dream world, a dream environment. The environment doesn't look like that. The environment as we know it today is random in its change, volatile, fast, extreme, unpredictable, dysfunctional. Jeff Immelt terms it very nicely when he talks about sweeping randomness, Jeff Immelt being the current CEO of General Electric. Now, like you, I'm also sick and tired of everybody telling me how messy, unpredictable, random, ever-changing, volatile the environment is. So the book doesn't stop there. The book actually provides us with tools and techniques to overcome this volatility, or at least to manage better within the midst of this volatility. And in doing so, we focus on complexity as a characteristic and dynamism as a characteristic, indicating the impact thereof on current ways of strategic thinking and possible new ways of strategic thinking. Let's talk about complexity first. Very quickly, when we talk about complexity in the book, we are actually referring to that interrelatedness and interdependency between systems, illustrated here through the means of the grey overlaps in this slide. Now, the significance and the relevance of that interdependence and interrelatedness, we term it emerging system complexes. Big words, just think complexity in the relation between these two systems. The significance and the relevance of that is you cannot unearth the information in that emerging complexes by looking at systems in isolation. You have to physically look at the interrelatedness and interdependencies between them. In there lies an additional pocket, an additional dimension of information, adding to the existing basket of information and hopefully contributing to a better understanding of the environment. The question, of course, is how do I do it? Well, what we've done through the research is we categorize, we analyze, we investigate systems by means of their qualities, their dimensions, their aspects, and the characteristics. That's now environmental systems that I'm talking about. For purposes of today's presentation, I designed or crafted my own acronym, QDAC. So it's qualities, dimensions, and characteristics, aspects and characteristics. And I thought QDAC will be easy to remember because it sounds like Kodak. All right, so that's the acronym for today. Each one of the co-contributing systems has a set of QDAC. But the emerging complexes, that interrelatedness and interdependencies, also has a set of QDAC. However, those are distinctly different from the QDAC of the co-contributing systems. You will remember in the beginning of the session I said the complexity that we're dealing with does not consist out of the sum of a lot of small parts, but it refers to this interrelatedness and interdependency between systems. The best way in which I can explain that is if you had to mix yellow and blue, you get green. It's a different dimension of information. Again, the question is, how do I get it? How do I access it? Well, here we worked with a number of organizations, in total 121, both locally and internationally, and we got them to view government and labor in their respective industries and respective countries, involving 17 countries on the continent. And what we came up with is that, yes, systems evolve in space and time. They change. I mean, your organization evolves, government evolves, suppliers evolve, buyers evolve. But they do not all evolve equally. So what happens is, if you, for instance, view a government and a labor system, and they evolve separately, that pocket of information, that emerging newness between the two, is very much based on the change forces bringing about this level of evolvement. and then also how these institutions are leveraging those change forces off against one another. That gives you some indication of the pocket of information between these systems. Right, so that is insofar as complexity is concerned. Now let's look at dynamism. Another characteristic which we used to look at in terms of the environment to try and assist organizations to better deal with the dynamism of the volatility of the environment. When we talk about dynamism, we refer to environmental systems that change within themselves, but they also change in terms of their relation towards other systems in the environment. And that change is either transactional or contextual. So if you, for instance, take something like a supplier or a buyer, as an organization you might have a high level of influence over that buyer. The minute you have a high level of influence, we deem it transactional. But I want you to take note, it's a relational status. It's not as if the buyer is really close to you. The buyer can sit in America. The supplier can sit in China. It refers to the relational status. You have a high level of influence, transactional. Lower levels of influence would be contextual by nature. Now, easy way for me to explain this is, my daughter is 9. If we want to go away for the weekend, and I ask her that question, she's already in the car by the time that the question is finished. She's 9 years old, she still thinks that I'm the next best thing to white sliced bread, she clings to my leg, everything that daddy says is just great. She is transactional in terms of our relationship. My son recently turned 13. When I ask him whether he wants to join us for the weekend away, he tells me, I'll think about it, and I will let you know. He's now a teenager. My relation with him is contextual. My levels of influence over him is less. But the point is, ladies and gentlemen, if I want to take both of them on the weekend away, my approach, my strategic approach towards my son needs to be significantly different from what it is towards my daughter. I can't think him back into a transactional relation. I need to change my approach. It's the same in business. Conceptually, we, in our mind, think of transactional systems as being closer and contextual systems as being further away. Actually, that refers to the hierarchical levels of influence based on your relationship. And this was a fundamental find in the study. This is a dynamic relation. It changes. Your mechanistic approach, your other frameworks would tell you that once you categorize a supplier as part of the competitive environment, it stays there. It doesn't. It moves. It moves into the contextual environment. It actually moves into the macro environment. It goes and sits next to politics and economy that you have no levels of influence over. And for you to manage that environment, that system better, you need to change your strategic thinking and approach towards that system. Let's elaborate a little bit further on that, just highlighting the impact again on strategic thinking. Strategy, in its strictest sense, is the juncture between opportunity and threats, the external environment, and strengths and weaknesses in the internal environment. Most of us would be familiar with that term. We call it the SWOT. Strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. But what we're actually trying to identify is what is out there that I can make use of, and what do I have internally that I can apply in terms of making use of those opportunities. So strategy is a selection. I always say to people strategy, and I know we like to go away for a bosberaad, but strategy is not something that is waiting for you in the field, in the bos. And it doesn't fall upon you in the moment of divine intervention after evening 3. Sorry, McDonald's, I know that you... Right? Strategy, in the strictest sense, is a science. It's a selection based on what that content is and what this content tells you. Now, conventional literature will tell us that systems in the transactional environment, you have to have a strong relationship with, you build that relationship, you increase your barriers to entry, you want to make it as difficult as possible for competition to enter that realm. On the other hand, those in the contextual environment, I need to be more flexible towards. And the reason why I need to be more flexible towards it is I can't control it. I can't influence it. My approach towards my son needs to be more flexible. Okay? It's the same with the system. Busy writing up a case study on Marikana. Marikana is an interesting example. And it's a sad example. I don't like talking about it. But we need to learn from that example. And one of the key findings that we find in the case study is that part of the reason why